The idea came to me from my husband's mother, who had always made crepes. Friends would come over and his mother would always make crepes for them. When they were out, they begged her to make more. After studying various recipes and practicing, I invited my friends over to try them. They all said yes, yes, yes. We had our debut at the homecoming for TSD. We grew so fast, and the hearing community too. I can't believe it.
I used to go to the post office box on my way home every day. When I opened it, there was no mail in there. Or when I'd find a small card for a package notification, the post office would be closed. It wasn't until last year that we decided to establish this business. We get your mail and then we scan them. Various possibilities, many needs out there to be fulfilled.
There are different products and crafts from all over the world. They're very unique. Things you've never seen before. I hand select artists, and I'm actually an artist myself. I design the jewelry, and it's where I belong. I've immersed, and one way thing to another, and so I've started an online business.
Really, to make a long story short, I worked on the side with race cars.
My grandfather taught me about cars when I was 4. I was fascinated with Hot Wheels. I wanted to learn and get involved, but he said I had to sweep first, so that's what I did. Years later, my grandfather passed away, and I've been a mechanic for 23 years.
This gives me an opportunity to work on the goal of expanding my business. The deaf environment of this shop is incredible.
If you have any questions, ask the wrench. We'll always tell you the answer.